Our first speaker this morning is Dan Ross. He serves as the Minnesota Chief Geographic Information Officer and the Director of MinGeo. He's worked for the state of Minnesota for 20 years in multiple different agencies. He also works in NISGIC nationally as their treasurer. Dan's current focus is building partnerships within Minnesota's geospatial community to deliver foundational GIS services and resources for Minnesota and beyond. Sounds familiar, right? Both Wisconsin and Minnesota are working to build strategic directions for the geospatial initiatives. As we in Wisconsin work towards our new GIO, I thought it would be great in order to bring Dan in to talk about some of the things he's been doing. He's going to talk about some of the goals that he has in MinGeo. He's going to talk about activities that he's been doing as the GIO, challenges and opportunities that he's had in building strategic partnerships within his state and with the Fed, and the role of the GIO in Minnesota. So, Dan Ross.
Thanks. This one to work. Maybe is that better? Yes. Okay. We'll go with that. This one's kind of long, and it is Friday morning, and I know many of you had a rather tough night, so I'll be gentle. Thanks for having me and allowing me to share some of the things that are happening in Minnesota, as we're going through many of the same things that you are. So for the next 30 minutes or so, here's some topics that I want to talk to you about. Adam mentioned most of these, so I'll probably just jump right in. I'm not going to read every slide to you, but I'm going to leave it there for you. There's some significant differences between Minnesota and Wisconsin, but there's many similarities as well. So I'm going to start out with just a little bit of a short history.
Turn off the other mic.
I'll just turn this one. I can get it.
That's awesome.
Arguing with each other up here. I'll do this and maybe if it gets too loud for you. How's that? Okay. So as I get started, just a short history, because the Geospatial Office in Minnesota, or the Council in Minnesota, has been around for a long time, since 1978. So there's a really long history there, but that particular council, like the one you have here in Wisconsin, really didn't have any authority. And it was primarily a professional services group. 5 years ago, all of that started to change. In 2008, executive leaders in the state of Minnesota, along with some input from stakeholders, put together what they called a drive to excellence. The governor at the time had all these different initiatives called Drive to Excellence, and they put one together for GIS. And the goal of that was to provide stronger coordination throughout the state, not even just state government, although that's where it started, but also with our local partners and our nonprofits and our privates and our academic institutions as well. In 2010, what that effort came out with was legislation. And they brought it to the legislature, and the Minnesota Geospatial Information Office and the GIO position were created in statute. It's made a huge difference in where we can go in the state. So I applaud your efforts here to kind of do something similar to that. In 2012, something else happened. The legislature created an IT organization for the state, and as part of that creation, all the geospatial professionals in state government were moved into IT. The office remains. The Minnesota Geospatial Office is still in statute. Just instead of being under administration, we're now under IT. So keep that in your mind as we go through, because some of the things that I'm going to talk about today relate to that move to IT. This is kind of like an aligning of the stars. Although they're aligning very slowly, they are aligning, and it's allowing us in Minnesota to do a lot of things. One of the things that as I came in, there was a lot of questions from the stakeholders about what my thoughts were and where I was going to take this. Being relatively new at that time in 2012, I felt that I had to have a vision that I could share with them. And here's what it is. It's really important to me that the community work closely together. And the community means the entire geospatial community in Minnesota and beyond. So when I look at the community, it's not just state government where I sit. I think the community, in order to be successful, we have to build those new and long-standing relationships. I can remember when I was in college, and when our consortium in Minnesota was relatively small, I knew everybody in the state that was doing geospatial work. Now, of course, the numbers are too great, but this new role and this new position are allowing me to get out and do that all over again. And it's one of the best parts of my job. I tell everybody in IT in Minnesota that I have the best job because I'm the only one that gets to work beyond IT. I want to have an environment in Minnesota where the stakeholders can freely share their ideas and their input. And that's really working. I'm going to talk about my state council here in a little while and the impact that they've had on the activities that are now taking place in Minnesota and the focus where we are. And most of all for us, it has to be business driven. And when I look at business driven for us is creating it once and using it many times. Creating those things that the business needs to move forward. One of those initiatives you're going to hear about in a few slides is open data. Fits right in with the theme here of data forward. We also had to have a mission statement or a set of goals that we went with, and we decided to go short. This is our entire mission or set of goals going forward. Improving services statewide through a coordinated, affordable, reliable, and effective use of GIS. I'm sharing with you this morning a little bit about what's in our mandate. This is one of the nice things about statute. It gives me as a GIO some authority to actually go out and do some of these things. But you're going to see some common themes in here as you go through. Now, I'm not going to read all of these. But you can see that it has primarily set the focus for the office. And that allows me the opportunity now to go out and do this. Provide coordination and leadership to integrate government and IT. In that Drive to Excellence project, our IT leaders, or our leaders that came from all the agencies to put that Drive to Excellence effort together to get that office created, recognized that GIS and IT need to work much more closely together than they do. And that's a philosophy that I'm trying to bring together in Minnesota. I'm going to talk about our Geospatial Commons a little bit later. When we put that together, that was really tested out to be a data portal and a site for delivering data, information, knowledge, and other things, not for just geospatial. Although that's what it is today, we're now having the discussions about how do we roll that out broadly, more broadly in the state of Minnesota. So there's an opportunity there to bring IT and geospatial more closely together. Eliminate unnecessary duplication. If your state is like ours, we all do our own thing, and it gets done once, twice, sometimes 3 times. When I look at the parcel collects that are going on in Minnesota, if you can imagine each state agency doing that, I figured it out. It was 667 requests going to the locals in 1 year. Now that's 87 counties, but when you figure that out, and you have 5 or 6 or 7 agencies doing the same thing and trying to collect that information just for their internal use, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So we want to promote and coordinate some consolidation of geospatial technology. I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we get farther in. And then, of course, we want to provide a mechanism for training and support throughout the state. But it doesn't stop there. We want to coordinate and guide the use of those resources. Traditionally, in the past, we've always done our own thing with the money as well. So there's a huge effort going on in Minnesota to bring some of that together, and I'll show you some examples of that. It's really important to me, as I mentioned earlier, that the community work closely together. So you see state and local government right in the mandate. We're trying to push technology forward together and create those innovative ideas that when they do come up, we get together and talk about them. Not surprisingly, we have to inform the legislature of the things that we do, so every year I have to write a report on what the office does and what we accomplish in the state as it relates to geospatial. This gives you a sense of our partners. I don't think it's so different than what's happening here in Wisconsin. But we have broad purview in the state of Minnesota. And for the most part, I think it works. So we have very good relationships with all of these entities that you see here. We also have some governance bodies, which is important to making any system work. We have two primary advisory councils, committees. We used to have another one as well, but that was sunset when IT was consolidated. Remember I said that all the geospatial professionals were moved together under IT. So we have a geospatial technical committee that works internally to set the policies for how geospatial works inside state government. And we set the standards for how we're going to have data available. You know, one of the big discussions we're having right now is our state standard is UTM NAD 83 for data. As we get into this web world, everybody's talking about should we have a second standard that moves us to Web Mercator, because that's a lot of what's happening out there now. We also have a statewide geospatial advisory council, which has 23 members that represents the entire geospatial community. This committee is really important, and they provide a lot of guidance to me and MinGeo over the last 2 years for where we're taking this now. Like you guys, we have committees and work groups as well, and everybody will tell you that this is where the real work happens. And we couldn't move forward without them. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you'll see some themes here as I get into the activities that I'm going to talk about that are related to the work that we do. We are indeed an organization in transition. So we started down there at the bottom where everybody was doing their own thing. In 2008, everybody recognized that we were working individually as departments, not as one. Right now, we're probably in that multi-departmental stage, but we're certainly shooting towards enterprise. And I'll show you some of that. So think about the situation where each agency had their own GIS, their own silo, their own leadership, their own data, and they worked with all of the local partners independently. Today, we're bringing all of that together. I have employees in multiple agencies now. So with that consolidation, it's becoming much easier. It's opened new doors as part of the consolidation. Now, I'm not going to read through each of these either. This is what happens in a consolidation. Really, the important slide is the next one. So what's happening is we're developing the functional alignment between the agencies. So imagine a pooled resource type of alignment where we have developers and analysts and technicians and cartographers that any agency can use. That's the direction that we're going. Imagine that instead of each agency having and managing their own infrastructure, that we're taking care of that for them in one place, so they don't have to worry about that. They can just go do GIS and serve the business of their agency. So we are moving towards that services delivery approach and creating new functions that will serve an enterprise instead of having each agency do it on their own. I have employees that I have embedded in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and we're going to embed some more in the next gen 911 team that's just getting started. I have 4 employees in our Department of Health, and they serve the business needs of that organization as well. So we're going through a transition here and a functional alignment that aligns both the services and the resources. But all along, we have to pursue those outcomes. So when we said that we were going to do this, the executive team said, what are you going to come up with? What are the outcomes? So this is what we shared with them. We're moving towards standard geospatial services, and I'm going to show you some of those in just a little while. The first 6 months I spent out working with the stakeholders in the community. The people in my office were a bit surprised because the stakeholders saw me more than they did. But the goal there was to really understand what the community needed and wanted and what the enterprise needs were. And it's made a huge difference. We have people coming to the table now that weren't at the table before. And they're helping us to define what those enterprise geospatial needs are. And we're now prioritizing those and moving some of those forward. And I'll show you those. I already mentioned the common infrastructure. We'll manage it in one place now instead of 17 different agencies. That's the agencies that are using GIS in the state of Minnesota. Not to say there aren't challenges that we have to work through. And I think all of you are aware of this as well. I heard AJ talk about this a little bit yesterday. There's limited resources, not only in state government, but also at that local level. And you experience that all the time. We have huge challenges with open data in Minnesota, and I'll show you some slides about where we are with that as well. And it's not that they don't want to share, but there has been this culture of not sharing in the past and or charging for data. That makes it very difficult. But we're starting to see a wave. And then, of course, we have limited established standards. When I look at the foundational data sets for Minnesota, we have a draft parcel standard, but we also have our Department of Revenue who is now going from the block level down to the parcel level. And they're going to collect parcel information that's completely different than what our draft standard is. So we're trying to bring those two together. We have draft standards for address points and things like that, but with next gen coming along and the NENA standards and other things, we have to revisit all that. We're going through a state centerline effort right now. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And we're struggling with standards there because local government does it different than what our DOT does. So we're trying to mix those needs together. With every challenge, of course, there's an opportunity which leads to the activities. So I want to talk a little bit about what's working well in Minnesota. Our regional user groups and their activities are a great example of some good things that are happening. So I'll show you a couple of those. We also have some local things that are going on and some statewide and federal and private. So again, we're looking across the entire community and they're helping us to build not only the activities, but the governance to support it. I mentioned open data earlier. Our Metro GIS, I think many of you have probably heard about them, is a very active organization and nationally recognized for the kinds of things that they have done. Recently, they started an open data effort. And in the period of a year, they were able to convince county commissioners that open data is a far better policy than charging for data. And I'll show you that. They put together common data standards and tools that they've been willing to share with the rest of the state and the state itself. So they're actually a little bit ahead of us. The 8 counties just got together and created a model for road center lines that we're going to be able to use for next gen 911. And they're going to share that with the rest of the state. So for me, having Metro GIS is like having another whole resource team in my pocket. And that's the kind of relationships we want to create. Here's an example of some of the things that are happening with free and open data. Our Clay County up there in Moorhead and Fargo has had open data for a long time. Who can tell me why? What happens in Fargo and Moorhead? Every 5 years, sometimes less than that, they get this thing called a wall of water coming at them. So they have to share data. And they've seen huge benefits by doing that. Washington County just adopted a resolution a couple months ago. Stearns County last year, 2 years ago, when I first started, you all have challenges. Stearns County was my challenge. And I spent a lot of time in Stearns County. And they were one of the most vocal against open data in the state. They're now open. So something's clicking. Maybe it's peer pressure. They see all their metro partners opening their data up. Maybe it's the 15 or 16 times that I've been up to visit and they want me to stay away. I'm not sure. But it's working. So we're going to take it. Shrewsbury County has zeroed out their fees, so we're starting to see maybe they don't open the data up and you still need a license agreement, but we're seeing the fee structures drop off. Our portrait map library is now getting into the mix, and they're interested in this as well. For those of you, I heard a university talk yesterday about an open portal for the universities. In Minnesota, that's called Geospatial, and they're starting to do the same things there. So I encourage you to reach out to Len Nee and see what they're doing. There's probably some possibilities of sharing data across those invisible borders. I guess they're kind of visible between Wisconsin and Minnesota in the form of rivers. Here's an example of the free and open data. This is where it started as of January 2014. This is where it is now. So you see the blue here, that's all now open. And actually we've added some others to this. So Stern should now be purple or dark blue on this. They're open. St. Louis just recently dropped their fees, the big one up there in Duluth. And they're doing it in subtle ways. You won't find this stuff on their website unless you look, but it's all there free now, where it wasn't before. So there's a movement going on. They're creating a new national park in Minnesota. And one of the things that's important there is land ownership, because the federal government and the state government lease land to folks, and they put their cabins on the lake and things like that. And in order to create this new national park, they have to create, state park. I stand corrected. It's going to be Vermilion State Park. There has to be some land swaps that occur. So when they started looking at the different records between the counties in northern Minnesota, nobody kept their land records the same. And they couldn't figure out who owned what in some cases. And the deeds and the records weren't in order, so they actually can't swap land. So they got together and they decided, we're going to take the draft state standard and we're all going to go to that. And we're going to share our data across the borders. We're going to do it all the same. What else is happening in northern Minnesota that's in the news? Something about copper nickel mining, which is going to have a billion dollar impact. So there's another reason that they have to share land records. So this is all activity that I'm just sticking in my pocket saying, these guys are great. Another team, I have a team in northern Minnesota that's working for me as well. I don't even have to pay them. So I'm pretty excited. But these are the kinds of things that are starting to happen all over the state. Here's one that's going on in Minnesota and has been for some time. This is our second statewide flight. The previous one was 15 years before this. But we're starting to try to create a program so we get regular flights every 5 years in greater Minnesota and every 3 years in the urban areas. Now, you see a 5-year plan because Minnesota's rather large and the time between ice off and leaf on is very short. So that's why you see this type of breakout. But I think the important thing here is the 22 partnerships that have taken place and the cost shares. So what has happened is MinGeo took on all the contracting and working with the vendors and getting everything arranged. And we work with DOT to put targets all over the state for control. And they took that on. And they worked with the county surveyors. So now we have this good control for our aerial imagery statewide. So you got all these people working together making this happen. And what did it do? It reduced the cost and increased the resolution. It gave us better quality data. And the contracting was easier. So here's an example of the kinds of things that we're trying to put in place that make it work as a strategic program in Minnesota. The blue areas that you see on this map are the partnership areas. Some of them we got increased resolution, other ones we got other things. Very important to making it work in Minnesota. Here's a breakout of the roles and the cost shares and how it happens. So when you look at this, our partnerships paid for just about half of this effort in the state of Minnesota. And they covered about a third of the area in Minnesota as well. So when you really get your partners, your federal partners, and your regional partners, and you'll see that we have some of our tribal nations involved here. It all works. It works so well that the metro counties have gotten together and said, well, you do it again in 2016. So we're working with the metro counties right now. The Met Council of Minnesota needs to fly every 5 years. So this is a flight year coming up. But we're trying to change it this year. We're trying to put together what we call a master contract so that We write work orders instead of contracts every year. And it's a much easier process. And others besides the state can buy off that contract and they can write a work order. And every year it's competitive. The previous contract, it was competitive for 5 years. So we did one contract over the 5 years. This is the individual work orders that are competitive every year. And this is what they came up with when they did their surveys. So they're going to do 6-inch spring leaf off. And they're considering other options to go with that. But it's working. You have a bunch of partners working together again. We work with our federal partners, and this is an example of what's going on here. And there's lots more. I don't have them all in here. We work with other efforts as well, but we're working with Jeff Bloomquist, our FSA representative, on a native plight for 2015 as well, and trying to encourage some cost shares between local government and federal government. This is an example of what that looks like for 2016. Looks like Wisconsin's going in 2015 as well. Okay. We do things like funding for collaborative programs, similar to what you have here in Wisconsin. Now, we haven't been quite as successful as you. In fact, we haven't been successful at all. But I have put legislative proposals in for the last 2 years. Having my office and my role in statute allows me to do things like this, where I can go to the legislature and ask for money or ask for law changes. That's a really important aspect of being able to move a vision in a strategic direction forward. So we requested some additional funding for foundational data services and applications. We've built this new thing called the Minnesota Geospatial Commons that we want to leverage to do that. We want to make sure it's all publicly available and that we focus on aggregating and standardizing and sharing it back in a standard way. And we want to build programs, not one-time projects. These are very similar to what you have here in Wisconsin. Centerlines, addresses, parcels, LiDAR, aerial imagery, and hydrography. These are also the same programs, many of them, that are going on at the federal level, the national level. And you have other things like addresses for the nation that will be participating in. And I don't know how well you folks work with your Census Bureau, but we're starting to have them work through us at the state level rather than having them go and contact every county. I just got a request from them last week for 14 counties. It didn't make it in the governor's budget. In Minnesota, if you don't make it in the governor's budget, you simply don't make it. But we have other ideas as well. We'll try again next year, and we've identified some other avenues. Some of you may be familiar with the Legacy Fund in Minnesota, where 3/8% of our tax dollars goes into a arts, recreation, and environment trust fund. And we're able to leverage that fund from time to time. That aerial imagery project, the state's portion of that was funded out of our Legacy Fund. We have 911 funds that we're pursuing for Next Generation 911 is another avenue. So I'm always looking for who's got the money. We're doing a project for drainage records modernization where we're standardizing the drainage records for the state of Minnesota and going to make them publicly available. So we're working with local government and state government and private stakeholders to put that together. We're doing a statewide parcel address and Centerline Collect. This is a precursor to Next Generation 911 for us, but it's also to start to get that collaboration flowing across the local governments and the regional governments and the state. So this is where we're at today. We've contacted all 87 counties, 50 of the 87 counties. We've collected data from 25. We're hitting all the major cities. And of course, we're working closely with our tribal nations as well. This is where we expect to be. By May 15th, my sense is we'll have collected what we can collect. And like your state, it's probably in many different states as it comes in. Some are very good. Some are just getting started. Some have been doing it for a while. Some have metadata, some don't have metadata. One of my employees said, we're creating a mutt. I said, it's better than what we have today. Besides that, I like dogs. So by January, we hope to have these files aggregated and shared back to those that want them in a public way. You probably don't know, but in Minnesota 2 years ago, we were able to pass a law that says governments have to share data. That was one of those challenges that I mentioned early on, that now they share data across government lines at no cost. We've started another experiment in Minnesota called the Minnesota Geospatial Commons. So we're planting seeds. We wanted to build a place of choice that folks can go to find and evaluate and access and keep in touch with data and other geospatial resources that meet their needs. But we also wanted to make it a place where publishers wanted to put their data. There's the address for anybody who wants to follow along. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on these slides. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but to show you some of the features. And the reason I'm showing you the features is because these are the features that the stakeholders in the broad geospatial community have defined. We started this discussion in 1999. We built it last year. So I said the stars are aligning. I just said they're moving slow. But we'll take what we can get. So the Geospatial Commons isn't just about data. The stakeholders said we have to have access to web services because we want to be able to plug right in. So we did that. We want to have access to applications and code. We didn't build that coming out of the gate, but the team is working on it right now. So we're looking at what shared code repository we want to use so that partners can publish their code there for access by others. Remember I said early on that we want to make it once and use it many times. We wanted a site where they could share ideas, so we put up some little news sites, and we put up some sites where a part of the site where you can follow the data and share comments, and I'll show you that. And we want them to share their knowledge. We also said that state agencies, you no longer get a choice, your data is going there. We're shutting down all the individual state agency sites, and they're all going to be here in the Minnesota Geospatial Commons. And oh, by the way, we're going to create a catalog service so it can go into the federal catalogs as well. So they don't have to recreate it. So it ends up in one place. And oh, by the way, we're going to let publishers do it because we want the authoritative source. And we're going to give them 3 ways. Maybe that next slide told us all about it. It doesn't. The 3 ways are they can publish it on our site and we'll host it for free. They can publish it on their site, but we want them to put their metadata in there so folks can at least find it and evaluate it. And finally, we have a site where many of our partners just want to share with the state. They don't want to share with the private sector in a published way. They want the private sector to come to them. So we have a method where they can drop it in a folder that only gets shared with the state. Not our preferred option, but it's the reality of where we're at. So the system is set up to find, evaluate, access, and stay connected. Multiple ways to search. Really important. Not only multiple ways to search, but multiple keywords, multiple tags, multiple types of data. I'm going to show you that in a minute where the stakeholders really said, well, maybe I don't want a shapefile. Maybe I want a CSV. Or maybe I want a REST service. So we did that. We did it by organization. As we were talking to the organizations, they said, well, you're telling me I have to give up mine, but how are people going to know who I am? So we said, we're going to give you your own space. We're going to continue to allow you to have yourself recognized as an organization. And so they each have a tab inside here that can be clicked on, and all their data sits under that tab. Multiple formats I mentioned before. You can see here, HTML, file geodatabase, shapefiles, JPEGs, geospatial packages, web apps, REST services. And that was the goal here, was not to just represent the data one way, but rather keep it flexible so that publishers could publish it in the form that they wanted to. We wanted to make sure that we were following standards, so here's all the ISO standards for categories. So when you put all that together, you have multiple ways to access the data. We made sure that the one requirement that we have if you're going to publish in this system is it has to have metadata. Not only does it have to have metadata, but it has to be standard metadata. So you can get to the full metadata record if you need to. You can download it. It was a really important thing for the stakeholders to say, can I not only access it and know that it's there, but can I get access to it and download it? So we've done that in multiple different forms. And here's some examples. Now you'll find as you get into the site, if you're following along, that you can go down farther and farther and get more and more information as part of your evaluation and access process. You're going to find that the metadata comes with it. It's the way it's packaged. You'll find that if you register with the system, you can get access to more things. Our stakeholders said, I want to know when data changes. So if you register, you can see when the data changes. In fact, you can see the 5 minutes. Okay, thanks. In fact, you can see the entire activity stream of a data set if you decide you want to follow it. So imagine you logged in, you said, I want to follow this organization or this data set. And then you'll know about that every time you go to the system. You can share it on social media. And the reason we did that is because we wanted the data to get better. By having it out there in the public eye and having people comment on it, it forces us as data producers to get better. Here's where we're at. By the end of this fiscal year, our fiscal year ends June 30th, state agencies will be all moved over. If any of you go to the Data Deli site at the DNR in Minnesota, you'll see something out there now that says this site is going away. Those guys are really good. They're going to shut theirs down by February 28th. At the end of February, we're going to open this up to everybody. It's primarily been state government so far, but this is where we start asking partners to put their data there. So my hope is for Minnesota, there's one place to go to get this information. We're going to hook it up to those folks that have Esri's GeoPortal and use their API to bring the data across. We have a statewide Centerline initiative that's going on, where the state's going to give all of the locals that want to manage Centerlines in the state way a hosted solution so they don't have to have their own at no cost. It's another collaborative joint effort. I'm not going to read all that to you, but it's just another example of how we're working together. We want an authoritative data set that comes from the authoritative data producer that we can put in an aggregated, standardized statewide data set. And we'll not only give you the tools to do it, but we'll share it back with you statewide when we're done. Next generation 911 is right around the corner. We've just hired a PM to do that. DPS is the lead agency, but MinGeo is going to effort to create all the geospatial data layers that are needed to do that. So here's another example of where we're not just working inside the geospatial realm, we're stepping out and working with other offices. In the past, 911 hasn't been as much GIS as it will be for next generation for those of you that are involved in that. And now will serve as the backbone of the new environment. And those are the roles that we're going to take on at MinGeo. Here's an example of the data that's required. So we're going to start off by obviously creating that required data, but then we'll move on to the recommended. And the nice thing in Minnesota is we don't have to create all this. Much of it is there. We just have to work with the partners to make it happen. Here's an example of reaching across boundaries and all the organizations and agencies that we're going to have to work with to make it work. This is the best part of my job, working with all these folks. We work with the private sector. The wind generation farms in the state of Minnesota all have to go through our Department of Commerce, and we work with them to make sure that they're all mapped and that the geospatial data is available. We do the same for electric service utility areas and telephone exchange boundaries. Those are all privates, but we have to report to the FCC every year where those boundaries are. Well, it used to be they sent us a paper map. So we gave an online application that now they do their own boundaries, and we get one file for the state. We're creating data sharing initiatives where we're working with the stakeholders to say, let's not have 87 individual ones, let's have one. We're having discussions about enterprise services and what's needed at the state level. There's an example of some of the things that we're creating. And finally, we're starting to work to be that place where they put their data and we can help them distribute it. We're asking them about funding and collaborative opportunities and how we share data better in the state of Minnesota. So your takeaways. We're a relatively new office, but we've, because of many things, becoming a statutory office and having a GIO that has some authority to make things happen, we've been able to create a new approach. Collaboration and partnering, if you didn't get it, through all of that, is essential. We can't do without it. It's a must. Our focus, of course, is on those layers that we've been trying to create for the last 20 years and those services, but we're going to try to deliver them in a different way. And then finally, regular stakeholder input is essential. It can't happen without the stakeholders and the input. And of course, you got to have a vision, and you got to go after it.